All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back for another half an hour here. We've got an expert in the building that literally hit home for me so hardcore. I started listening. I'm like, wow, we got to talk about this a little bit more. So we're back for another half hour. Michael Cheun, Cheun Insurance, Missouri and Illinois Medicare plans, CheunInsuranceSTL.com. And the reason we wanted to dig in a little bit further here is because you start talking about the numbers. I'm a numbers guy. And I said, first question we're going to start off with that we didn't get to in the first show. Check out that first show. Lots of great information in there. Michael lays it out for you, why this is so important. And literally, how people can go from wealthy to not wealthy because they didn't plan.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that really what
Yeah,
happens?
thinking outside the box is really what it is. Really thinking outside the box, right? You can't have blinders on, through life. Because just because it hasn't happened to you yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen to you. Right? And I think over the years, I've seen a lot of seniors get themselves between a rock and a hard place just because they got those blinders on. Nothing's really bad happening to them. So to them, they're like, oh yeah, no big deal. The group of friends or whatever the group of people they hang around with, right? They're healthy or whatever it is. And I think for those people out there that actually have a small group of people that they hang around with, that it's always been healthy and nothing's ever happened, I think those people actually get hurt the most. Just because they don't see the bad side of things. They always see the good.
Right.
So when something bad happens to them, they're like, oh my gosh, I want this now. Well, the problem is with the insurance companies, they're not in business of charity. They're in business to make money, right?
Sure.
By the time you realize, Carter, that you need to have insurance, well, guess what? You can't get it because the insurance company is not going to insure you because you're uninsurable.
Yeah, you've got health issues at an age, whatever it is. If you've had a spat with cancer or
absolutely.
Blood pressure, all of those things add up, and they go, you cannot even get insurance.
Yeah. There's a look back period, and depending on the company, some company look back a year, some look back 5 years or 10 years. So, I mean, it's not like the scenario I always give to people is always like, you can't be buying car insurance in the middle of a car accident. No car insurance company is going to sell you car insurance because you're in the middle of an accident, right? And I think people should think outside the box like that because, over the years, I've always heard people, I think when I turn 70, this is when I'm going to look into something. Well, what's going to happen to you at age 70 that isn't going to happen to you tomorrow, So again, it's all perspective, right? It's all making sure that people.
I've heard the phrase, people don't plan to fail,
but they plan to fail, or they plan to fail the plan.
They fail the plan, right?
Yep.
Yeah, you've heard that one.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I mean, it's just a matter of just taking the time. What's the typical? I'm jumping around here because I want to answer questions. I am the producer and the editor, so I get to sometimes jump around because I want to hear relevant things I think are important. But what generally does it entail? Is it a half an hour, one meeting, two meetings? Depends on the scenario, how many kids and family, and
I always
when somebody wants to sit down with you, what do they have to do?
If possible, because I deal with people who are going into 65 years old or even younger than that sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Or even the older people in their 80s. I really like to have sit down with their kids and just say, hey, this is what we're talking about. So they're there. I mean, over the years, I've had so many of them appointments that I sit down and talk to with the kids. Right? And moms and dads, they have a different way of thinking versus what the kids are thinking, right? And sometimes, from a kid's perspective, because I'm still a kid to my parents, right? I have a different way of thinking when it comes to my parents, So I think that, when it comes to meetings, from a meeting perspective, for sure, at least one or two times.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about just as a matter of when people should get involved, the process here, when they sit down with you. I mean, people start talking about this in their 30s, 40s, 50s.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you're looking at, right? When you're talking about, long-term care or something like that, the ideal age is anywhere between 45 to 55. That's the most ideal age. Okay. By the time you sit down and you're 75 years old to trying to buy long-term care, there's going to be a couple things against you to be able to get long-term care. One is probably your health, right? Because they're going to scrub every detail of your medical history before they give you $7,000, $8,000 worth of benefits per month, You know what I mean? From the insurance companies, right? So from a vetting standpoint, the insurance company is definitely going to vet you properly before they give you any type of insurance. If you're talking about long-term care, okay? Right. And age is a big thing. Believe it or not, I have a lot of people that becomes uninsurable because of age.
Really, they'll just say,
you're too old. You're 85 years old. You want to look for long-term care? No, we don't want to entertain it because
you're not even going to offer it.
Yeah, I'm not going to offer it because of age. So it's just nuts.
So you would advocate that people start talking to you about this in their mid-40s.
Depends. It depends on what they want. Right? Okay. Depends on what they want. Like myself, I have a major medical plan. Whatever it is I'm talking to you about, Carter, I have for myself. Okay, so I'm not going out there and advocating things that I wouldn't get for myself. Okay, right. So when you're talking to me at a young age, well, yeah, it might be a good idea if you have insurance plan from your employer, right? And you have a big deductible, you have a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. Well, you know what? I have a major medical plan too through my wife's employer, and of course, we have several $1,000s worth of deductibles or whatever it is, and you would just want to make sure that you're not going to be held responsible for the out-of-pocket expenses when a medical situation arises.
All incredible information, everybody. I'm going to put the hat on a little early for the second half hour because when you're impacting the community like it is, I personally been through this. And here, an expert like yourself, I'm going, this is the guy we need to talk to. Michael knows his stuff, and therefore that's why we wanted to bring you on the show to talk about this because literally, it can destroy somebody's financial. We talked about this. One of the jokes I use all the time is I do run around with a few people who are very wealthy, and privately we know this. Yeah. Publicly, people may not know this. They don't want people to know they've got money, of course. So I go, hey, I've got money. Everybody come bother me to borrow money. We know how that goes. But I said, my joke to my friends is that I've got friends from all. Yes, I just try to be friends with everybody. I think it's a good method for life. Be friendly and nice, polite to everybody. Got that from my mom and my dad. Lucky to have two parents like that. But bottom line is, if you're seeing somebody who's filthy rich and you're kind of jealous of their richness, their prosperity, wait one generation. Or in this case, wait until they make it into their 70s or 60s or maybe. Because they can be depleted of that information. And that's another reason we'd be nice to everybody because you never know how affluent you may be. But it can come crashing down really fast. Yeah. And then my dad would always say, remember all the people on your way up, because you're going to see them on your way down too. And be nice to everybody. But back to the point, which is make sure you can insure yourself properly to have this kind of coverage. Get this coverage started. So we're talking about, let's say I'm a 53-year-old. What would you recommend to me to say, all right, long-term care, long-term, what I don't even know all the necessary things that I should be looking at.
I guess my first question, if I was to actually talk to you on a sit-down basis, right, I would find out what's important to you, right? Yeah. Right now, what's important to you, right? Because a lot of people have different experiences with their family members or people they see. Right. If you say, hey, Mike, I've have this family member in over the years, they've gone into a nursing home, and I know that's one thing. It's a big component in my life that I don't want to be dealing with that type of cost, right? Then we can talk about that, right? Or you may say, hey, you know what? My family's cancer prone, right? And my God, if I get diagnosed with cancer, well, what happens? My medications is experimental, right? And it's going to cost $50,000 a pop to get that medication. Well, that could be pretty depleting pretty quickly. You know what I mean? Especially for somebody that's younger, right? Again, I tell people, it's like, you just don't know what's going to happen, right? And you just have to think outside the box and just kind of, people use insurance to leverage risk, right? To minimize risk, okay? Yeah. And you have to think about it, right? I deal with insurance on both sides of the spectrum, right? People who are living very modestly and people who have a lot, okay? Right. People who have a lot, they have a lot for a reason because they're not stupid with their money, right? Yeah. Right? People who are very modest, well, sometimes they didn't have, the opportunities, okay?
Or the guidance,
Right. So people who are very modest, they want to have insurance to protect the things that they don't have, meaning that they don't have that $200,000 in an event if something should ever happen, right? Well, people who have a lot, well, guess what? They want to buy insurance to protect the things that they do have because they don't want to lose it.
Right.
Right? So both sides of the spectrum, people use insurance for a reason.
Well, that's important for people to understand because it's a matter of protecting what you've worked. These people have worked their entire lives, created businesses and inventions, or taken businesses to another level where they worked their way up, started at the bottom, now we're here kind of thing, right? And why would you want to spend that much time, energy, effort, and just all around just being a good person? Generally, people that have been successful is because they treat people well, they do right. And then not to think about protecting themselves with it. Talk to me a little bit about that. Does it matter? Let's just say a guy like myself, I would want to make sure, and I'm just throwing out a scenario. Not that this is my scenario. Maybe I have $1 million.
Hypothetical, right?
Hypothetical. Maybe
Hypothetical
I have
scenario.
$1 million in assets right now, and or maybe let's just say $1 million. Let's go with $1 million in assets.
Why not?
Right? Maybe I'm using a ballpark for what I've learned from what I've got. And I've worked hard. I've earned everything I've got, and I've got some nice resources. I've protected things and got the right insurance. Like, for instance, right off a great example, my dad had an uninsured liability policy on me in case I got into an accident and were hit by somebody who didn't have insurance. Go figure. And that's what happened. I'm in a coma, pulling a ventilator out of my own throat. So I walked to the bank with a check for $133,000 after the attorney took a third because it's a $200,000 policy. And I did what I shouldn't have done. I spent that money, but over time. But I spent it on computers and things that built to where I'm in. I've made over my life a couple million, $2 or $3 million. If you add up 80, I was making $100,000 when I was 27. Yeah. Fortunate, got in the computer world. Parents maybe said, do that in case the baseball career doesn't work out. Coach told me I had what it took. I just met with him recently, college coach, but God had a different plan. So these are the unforeseen things you can't predict.
Right.
You don't know what's going to happen where you get hit by a drunk driver. In that case, that's a different type of insurance.
Right, absolutely.
You're talking about. But how often is that? That's a very unlikely scenario.
Right.
The scenario that you're talking about is very, very, very likely as a matter of they are going to have some kind of a health issue. We at this point cannot study. They're working on this, right? We're going to predict what can happen to you based on your DNA and your genetics and da-da-da. But right now, as I stand, I'm saying it's going to be the next 10 or 15 years at least for everybody that's going to be affected here. In the next, this is a big impact. Right. Now you go from, you talked about that. If you're talking, let's do math. $8,000 a month is $100,000 a year.
Yeah.
$8,333.
Yeah.
Figure out, do your math. I know these numbers because I've done some stuff in this area. That's $100,000 a year. You do that for 5 years.
Yeah.
You just spent $500,000.
Exactly.
If you're paying for that out of your own pocket.
Yeah.
I hope you had $500,000 to do that. But you're saying get an insurance policy. What kind of policy would cover somebody in that scenario?
You know, if you're talking about somebody getting insurance to kind of cover themselves in a facility, right?
Because 5 years is one thing, but you're talking 10 years more likely. Well, and that's what I'm saying. If I got $1 million, I want that to go away.
Yeah. I mean, you know, it really is, you know, like I was telling you before, you know, you have traditional plans where you pay into it on a monthly basis, you know, your traditional type of long-term care scenarios. You know, you're also going to have those who say, hey, I don't want to be spending, you know, whatever let's say hypothetically, let's say $500 a month, let's just say, right? Well, I don't want to spend $500 a month and I pay it in for 10 years, you know, at $6,000 I pay in, you know, 10 years, I put $60,000 into this thing, right? I don't want to pay into it and not get anything out of it, right? Just like car insurance, right? Sure. You're happy to pay, well, I'm not being happy to pay car insurance, but, you know.
If something go wrong,
yeah, well, absolutely, right? So you're gladly will pay the cost of the car insurance to know that you're covered properly, because in an event if you ever do get in an accident, you can't be sued, or you can't, you know, you're not liable out of your own personal pocket, right? And believe it or not, a lot of people, you know, again, it's all about perspective. At the end of the day, it's all about perspective, right? And I tell people, it's like, you know, you are your biggest asset. You are your biggest asset, right? So hypothetically, Carter, if your house was paid for, by law, you don't need to have insurance. Right? You don't have to have insurance because you're your home.
Self-insured.
Right, self-insured, right? But here's the thing. If you live in a $500,000 house, okay, would you sleep good at night not knowing that you have insurance for the house? Because if it burns down, it's your dime.
Now, you're self-insured. You have enough assets to build it back. But it's coming out of your
exactly,
assets.
Right?
Coming out of your assets, we said there, ladies and gentlemen. But literally, I mean, this is where people don't contemplate this stuff. They don't plan to fail, they fail to plan.
Right.
And even the wealthy people sometimes don't take the time to have these discussions and sit down with you. So if I was a $500 a month policy, and I get into this, some people would say, tell me the counter to this, if I invest $500 a month, Well, understand the appreciation. If you're what kind of return you're getting,
Yeah.
you don't put all your eggs in one basket, is what you're
Right,
ultimately
right.
saying. That's fine. Do your investments.
Right.
Make sure you're putting money away for that. But that's not going to accrue quickly enough
absolutely
to cover
not.
you.
Yeah.
If it happens 5 or 10 or even maybe 15 or even 20 years from now,
Right.
great. Your assets grew up to $500,000 or whatever because
Yeah.
you invested at whatever age, 30, 50, whatever it is. Now you've got $1 million incident that happens to you.
Right.
Wiped out.
Well,
Because you didn't want to spend a little bit.
yeah, so, yeah.
And it's inevitable something.
It is inevitable, right? Because at the end of the day, right, you have two scenarios, okay? You have one as human beings, okay? History show as human beings, we don't get healthier as we get older in life, right? I mean, that's really is, right?
Generally, that is, yeah.
Right? We're not getting out here alive, that's for sure. You know what I mean?
That's true.
And the other thing is that, hey, when have you ever seen medical expenses gone down over the years?
Right. Yeah.
Never. Right? Everything has gone up gradually. They're gradually going up, just like the stock market is ticking up. You know, it doesn't go straight up like this, but over the course of a 10-year or 20-year period, it will go up. You know, and so, you know, you're talking about today's dollars and being covered for today's dollars. Well, today's dollars may not be the same dollars as it would be 10 years from now. You know, so when it comes to coverage, right? Yeah, we could talk about today, what we could talk about tomorrow or a year from now, but if something should ever happen to you 20 years down the road, well, if you protect yourself against $8,000 a month today, right? 20 years from now, it's not going to be the same $8,000. Just like, you know, pre-COVID, okay, facilities are, you know, sub $6,000 going to the facility pre-COVID. But since COVID, now you're looking at $7,500 to a $10,000 mark, $10,000 range.
Wow.
It's just crazy. You think about, you know, the cost to go to a facility. And you know what? And we're just talking outside of medical insurance. You know, we're talking about long term, right?
Yeah, because the truth is in America, they're going to fix whatever it is, save your life.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully they did a good job.
Mm-hmm.
But there's still a recovery process and there's a post-accident, whatever. Your repercussions, or just the fact that you're going to have to now live whatever scenario you have. And then what else happens to you besides that? You know,
right.
The incident that you had, whatever might have caused you to be, you know, in a wheelchair.
Yeah, absolutely.
But then, do you end up with cancer? Do you end up?
Yeah.
And statistically, I just know the numbers. I'm looking at. I did a term life insurance. Mm-hmm. I was on a platform with that. I knew the InBev thing was coming for most people. Yeah. So my buddy's like, "Come work for me part time," and I was making $6, $7, $8 a month, doing a good job to help people understand that if they had a term policy, good. Then you do term life insurance too?
Absolutely.
So get a term policy, or they've got investment style, cash value, all of those. So you've got the gamut.
I do.
And people need to know you can fix the problem for them from any perspective, but anywhere they want to, I guess is what you're saying.
Yeah, you know, I tell people, it's like, you know, you can have insurance for a hangnail if you really want it, right? But why would you? You know,
right.
You want to protect the things you can't afford to lose, or you don't want to gamble with the things you can't afford to lose, right? So it's just one of those things where, you know, it's just, you know, number one, having a peace of mind, knowing that, hey, if I sit down with somebody, I get the information, I know what the scenarios are, I could see down the road 10 years from now of my family history of this or whatever the situation may be, right? I could protect myself properly. You know, whether you do it or not, it's totally up to you. But at least having a conversation helps you figure it out, because a lot of people don't know how to have the conversation.
And I would say you become some families' best friend, because you've literally taken them from a situation, because it's so difficult to understand all of what's going on here. And there's a lot that gets involved with it. And to be able to take this scenario and say, here's because every single person's scenario is completely unique. How many kids, where do they work, their personal health history, the relatives, their spouse. All those things have to get weighed in and factored.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you'll be able to put together a plan for them. And this is something. Tell me the process. Let's say if somebody wants to work with you, they go to the website. I'm going to show the website here. Everybody take a look here, because lots of valuable information here. And you can see here is Michael's website. You see last name Cheun.
Cheun,
right?
yep.
And if you look here, scroll down a little bit. Missouri and Illinois Medicare supplements, some products, contact information, very professional. Will you take this video and put it on the front of your website? Because I think this video has become very informative.
Absolutely.
Put that out there for us.
Absolutely.
But just look at some of the insurance products that are available here and what you're going over here. But you can tell, without going, I want to blow people away with all of the information on your website in our remaining 8 minutes we have in our interview here. But literally, you have got all the answers for people. They're not going to be able to assemble this unless they sit down with you.
Yeah.
And it's easy to do. They can click the contact
Yep.
information here, fill this out, and then schedule a time with you. Is that the easiest way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, absolutely. Or just call me. You know, that's my cell phone number on there.
Okay.
So you call me, you know, and there's no obligations, of course. You know that, right? I mean,
Sure.
you know, I'm not going to say, hey, you have to do this.
Right,
okay.
of course.
You know, but
it wouldn't be the same business that way.
Right. But I think that, you know, by having a conversation and not knowing what options are, right? Just knowing what your options are, you know, a lot of people feel like, man, you know what? That's great, right? At least I know what I can do.
Yeah.
What's out there for me to take advantage of.
And is it a matter of they can sit down with you once and say, all right, let's start off with this portion, whether that's a term life insurance,
absolutely.
a health care policy,
Yeah.
a life insurance policy, a long-term care policy, Medicaid and Medicare, all
well,
that.
you know what? A lot of people I sit down and talk to, they weren't born with a silver spoon in their mouth, right? So yeah, absolutely. You know, you could piecemeal it together, or you could say, hey, you know what? Yeah, I'll have a certain amount of budget that I deal with, right? And this is my most concerning thing to me. Right. You know, you deal with something that's most concerning to you at that point. And then, you know, if something changes, whether it's the financial situation changes or something happens to where now you kind of expand that a little bit to be able to cover for more things.
We've covered a lot here, ladies and gentlemen. We've got a couple minutes left. If you have a question and you'd like to get a hold of an expert, Michael here, Cheun Insurance, Missouri and Illinois Medicare Plans, CheunInsuranceSTL.com.
Mm-hmm.
And they can text you right there, 314-691-2218.
Absolutely, yep. Call or text.
Call or text. And an interesting discussion I had with an expert sat right here in my studio, and we talked about, when you're talking about this in this particular, he said, in our world as it is right now, you've got to deal with people who don't like me. His joke was, if you're dealing with people that are millennials, they don't want to don't look me in the eye.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I'll fill it out on my phone, and I'll send you the message,
yeah.
and you can just send something back to me. And that's one way to deal with it. Probably not as many people, but you might have some kids who are trying to help their parents.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
But otherwise, and then you've got to get this kind of information from people. We know that video ultimately helps people to convey what they're talking about. So Michael has a great looking website, lots of great information for you out there, and all kinds of resources you put available for people to do that. Because bottom line is, these are issues you can't ignore.
No.
Or you end up in a very bad situation.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like almost not like, oh, Carter, you can't predict. There's not going to be something you can't guarantee something's going to happen to somebody. Death is pretty sure. Right?
Yeah, well,
ultimately, that's we're all going to lead there. So then, what led you to that? There's two things everybody can count on, right? Death and
taxes, right?
And I hate to even bring that kind of a scenario out, but it's something you must deal with. And if you're not going to deal with it, you're going to really mess up your financial perspective for your family. Then that affects your kids, inheritance, and all of those things that could have helped them to avoid. So my mom said to me, Carter, I just want to leave you some money so that when I'm gone, you've got a little bit of an advantage. You've got a little bit there to take care of you. And so many people, they don't even think about these things until it's too late or too far down.
Yeah.
How big a difference is it for somebody that says, hey, I want to do something with you, but wait till I'm 50, 55, 60, 65.
Yeah.
Is that too far to along? And wait?
Yeah, well, when you have to understand, right, in the world of insurance, okay, you're 50 today and you're turning 51 next week, okay? Well, you're 1 year older in the eyes of the insurance company.
Right.
Being 1 year older means that it's going to cost you to have more of exactly the same thing from a week ago.
Even though it's a week later.
It's a week later. You're 1 day older.
Can't tell them you're 50 when you're not.
Exactly.
You just flipped over. My birthday's May 8th, everybody. Maybe I should make a call here. Michael and I sit down.
Yeah.
But literally, I mean, people put this off, and then they get to the age. Well, how much does it increase over time? As a matter of, okay, I'm 55, and I get into something, but can they expect to spend double that when they're 65 or 75? Or it depends on.
Well, first of all, you got to understand that you may not become insurable.
That's the biggest thing. Yeah.
That's the thing, right? I mean, from a cost perspective, you may not see it double. You may not see it go up 50%, but it will go up because as you get older in life, right, things don't stay the same in terms of insurance costs. But the $1 million question is that, well, am I going to be as healthy as I am today, 10 years from now, right? No. And nobody can say that, right? Like I said earlier, right? We don't get healthier as we get older in life. It's just the way it is, you know? And I think that people who don't sit down and have a conversation and be honest with themselves at least. You know, honesty is the best policy for me anyway, right? When it comes to sitting down with somebody, you know.
Absolutely.
You have to be honest with yourself. Yep. Yeah, so it's very, very important for you people to understand the options.
Yep.
Yeah.
Make sure everybody gets in on this. We're finishing up here. Just another minute left. And as we finish, this is like the joke is, and I'm not saying anything about gambling. I was over at the casino. I made an appearance just as a casual going to the casino. We went to the one on the other side. I don't name names until they, and it was fun. And they came up, they said, Cardinal Cowboy's in the house. And they said, we got to get a picture with you and put it up on our social media. And where I'm going with this is that you never know what might pop up. That just kind of popped up. It wasn't planned. But how often is it the case where if you don't take the time to at least sit down, when is the correct answer to go out and build your brand? When is the correct answer to go out and figure out where the long term, and in this case, when is the correct answer? When is the correct time to sit down and talk about this? The answer is now.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. You know, carpe diem, right? Carpe diem. Take advantage of the moment right now while you still have it, because you may not have it 5 years from now or next week. You know, we just don't know. You're just one fall away from being injured.
I think about that all the time. I'm getting older. My knees bother me just a little bit because I played a lot of sports, and they took some cartilage out of my knee back when I was in my 20s. And sometimes I wake up and I got to, man, all I need, think about my scenario with regard to my voice goes out. For me, it's an issue.
Yeah.
I have to do interviews all day long, right? And so these are all the little things. But worse than that, though, you have a heart attack. This just happened. Not to get into a sad story, but we're kind of talking about something where you have to think about these things. This is something you must contemplate. And a friend of ours, 60-something years old, no longer with us. Stroke. And they had to make the decision whether or not to leave them in a state of comatose state or to let them try to pull the plug.
Yeah.
And those are horrible scenarios. Now all the financial questions start coming about. And this is something you should definitely get a plan for this kind of scenario in place before you have to deal with that. Because somebody's 63 and they're smiling and running around and having a great time. That's only 10 years for me. I can't imagine I'll be in a wheelchair at 63. It might happen. You never know.
You never know. You just don't know, right?
Plan for that ahead of time. Make sure you're covered.
Absolutely. You know, like I say, right? You just want to have the conversation at least. Sit down, talk to somebody who can help you. It doesn't have to be me, but I'd like for you to be me, right? But talk to somebody who can have the information that you need, you know?
Well, you've taken the time to sit down and talk. Now we've done 2 half-hour discussions with Michael. So obviously he's taking the time because he does want to share this information and helping us to put together a nice little show here that we can share this kind of stuff with everybody. Thank you, Michael, for your time.
Appreciate it.
Check that out. Cheun, that's Cheun. You can see it on the website, that's our title tags. They call that a lower third, everybody. In the lower third, Cheun, Cheun, insurance.stl.com, or call them, text them directly, 314-691-2218.
Yep.
Michael, thank you for coming.
Appreciate it, Carter.
With us today. All right, stay tuned for more, everybody. This is the Your Little Castle Show.